Welcome, everybody. My name is Mark Nelson. I'm on the board for the Association of Vermont Conservation Commissions. And I want to thank you for joining us today for the first session of our 2020 Virtual Conservation Summit. The AVCC, a little bit about us, if you're not familiar, we're a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to support Vermont's conservation commissions and to encourage the establishment of more conservation commissions across the state. We'd really love to see one in every town across the state. We're a membership organization and conservation commissions as well as individuals as members of our organization. The AVCC was founded in 1990 and it is overseen by a volunteer board of directors. Each year, some of our activities, we host an annual summit. We provide tiny grants to conservation commissions. We maintain a website that has tools and support for conservation commissions, and we share success stories and help promote relevant events across the state that are conservation oriented. Our work is entirely enabled by memberships and contributions from conservation commissions and individuals and anyone on this call that made a donation. We really appreciate it. And we've got our sponsors, which we'll mention here in a little bit. This year we gave a lot of thought to how to hold our annual summit. The work of conservation commissions is all that more important right now during time when all of us are challenged with staying safe and learning how to stay connected and engaged while maintaining a proper distance from each other. Each year we try to provide topics and speakers that are interesting and those topics that will help conservation commissions improve their work. We hope that our 2020 virtual summit will meet that goal. Our theme this year is conservation in the time of COVID-19, and each session will explore the ways in which our collective conservation work has been impacted by and is relevant to the pandemic we're all living through right now. Today, our topic is the value of town forests during COVID-19. And anybody who lives near or around a town forest or any of our state or federal forests, hopefully you've been able to get out and enjoy them and help you through this time. Our speakers are Ethan Tapper from Vermont Forest Parks and Recreation. He's the Chittenden County Forester. We've got Nick Warner, who's with the Winooski Valley Park District, and Elaine Wang, who's the Assistant Town Manager for the town of Barre. So everybody in the meeting, except for the speaker, your mics should be put on mute. If they're not, please put them on mute. And if you don't mind, turn your camera off during the presentation so that doesn't distract the speakers. We'll have an opportunity for questions after the end of each presentation. And you can also post questions in the chat room and we'll be monitoring those. We'll do our best to get to all questions, but we can't promise that because of time. So before we begin our program, I'd like to thank our sponsors. Do you have them up yet there? Okay, thank you. So our sponsors are the Lintelak Foundation, the Nature Conservancy in Vermont, Two Rivers Kichy Regional Commission, Trust for Public Lands, the Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies, Vermont Land Trust, and Vermont Natural Resources Council. So with that, I will turn it over to Ethan, who is going to be our first speaker for the day.
All right. Hi, everybody. So my name is Ethan Tapper. I'm the Chittenden County Forester. I work for the Vermont Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. And if you've dealt with county foresters before, or if you haven't dealt with county foresters before, I should say, we do a lot of different stuff. Our largest role is supporting the management of private land. So in Vermont, we're 75% forested. 80% of those lands are owned by private landowners and families. And so we have this huge public stake in making sure that people do a really good job managing their land. And we have a bunch of different roles. We do that in a bunch of different ways, but another job that we have is supporting the management of town forests, which is something that different county foresters do to different extents. I do a lot of it, and I'm really excited just to share some of this with you. I will admit that I'm pinch hitting today, so if I seem a little scattered, that's why. And I do have to take off a little bit early at 12:30 as well. So please, if you have questions for me, I'll answer them at the end of the presentation. I won't be there at the very end of all the speakers. So with that, I'll share my screen. And here we go. So our tradition of town forests in Vermont started in 1915 when we passed legislation which enabled municipalities to acquire town forest properties for the purpose of forest management. And that statute from over 100 years ago has a really apt description of town forests. It describes them as, quote, a tract of land primarily devoted to producing wood products, maintaining wildlife habitat, protecting water supplies, providing forest recreation and conservation education. And if you guys are familiar with town forest, you'll know that this is actually a pretty good description of what town forests do today. All of those things to different extents, perhaps, than in 1915, but that's a pretty good roundup of the resources that town forests share. At that time, the state support for town forests was really different. They paid for reforestation costs, acquisition costs. In 1951, the state actually even passed a law that required each town without a town forest to put the question of whether they should acquire a town forest in the warning for their town meeting. Those early statutes gave the Commissioner of Forest, Parks, and Recreation some advisory and management authority over them. And that's the role that county foresters now play. Although there was at one time municipal foresters, a northern and a southern municipal forester, whose sole role was to support the management of those town forests. Today, the designation of a town forest as such no longer entitles a town to like state benefits. There's no longer necessarily funding that's specifically available to them to, say, plant trees or do road projects and acquire a town forest, although there are a number of awesome partners that are doing a really good job sort of filling that void on the acquisition side, like the Trust for Public Land and the Vermont Land Trust and others. Town forests today are called all kinds of different things. They're called community forests, municipal forests, town forests, natural areas, conservation areas, country parks. Basically, any piece of forested land that a town owns is a town forest, and it doesn't need to be officially designated by the Commissioner of Forest, Parks, and Recreation anymore. If your town owns a piece of forest, it's a town forest if you want it to be. Many of these newer town forests, so these older town forests were often acquired as water management forests to house and protect reservoirs, or towns acquired tax derelict parcels, abandoned parcels, stuff like that. Now, many of these town forests are acquired, and in the process of acquisition, they become conserved. So they partner with the Trust for Public Land or the Vermont Land Trust or a local land trust and pursue other types of grant funding that at the end of the process, as the part of this big conservation partnership, you have a town forest, which is not just owned by the town, but is also protected in perpetuity by a conservation easement. And they're managed for a variety of different uses, all different kinds of stuff. So recreation is certainly an up and coming use and one that we're seeing a lot more usage of during this pandemic. But they're also managed actively. This is a picture of the Heinsberg Town Forest, where I've been doing a demonstration forestry project over the last 2 winters. They're still managed for water management, flood attenuation, water quality, wildlife habitat, and many, many other different things. Town forests are cool. I love working with town forests, and one of the things that's so special about them is that they're all unique. So in Chittenden County, we have about 13 town forests that I know about. Again, there may be other pieces of forested land that the town owns that even the town doesn't know that they own. These lands cover about over 4,000 acres in my county, and they're all really different, and they're managed differently by the towns to reflect their different management philosophies and the values of people in the towns and the individual resources that these town forests offer. And I just think that it's so neat working with towns in this way is so fun, because these town forests are really agile and flexible. They're able to, you're able to be involved in that decision-making process in a way that maybe does not feel as accessible when you're working with state or federal land. You can just go to a meeting, now a virtual meeting, and have your voice heard. And again, that's, I think, one of the most important parts of it, literally, and I know that seeing a big room full of people now makes everyone feel really uncomfortable. It looks sort of wrong, doesn't it? You can have a stake in your town forest literally just by showing up and asking questions. And that's such an important thing. You can have, and in having that stake in your town forest, you can have a really big stake over some really important parts of how you maintain the character and the culture of your community, and your access to wildlife, your access to recreational resources. And I think that that's really important. Now, you could argue that, obviously technology is difficult for some people. For some people, now that may be even more accessible, right? Because you can be in your home and you can be tuning into public meetings every night of the week and participating. You don't have to even drive down to the town hall. Obviously, these town forests are all the time providing wildlife habitat, refuge for humans and wildlife, and all these public benefits. So clean air, clean water, carbon sequestration and storage, all these things. And of course, now that people are using them more and more, it becomes increasingly clear how public and how important these benefits are. And one thing that this is sort of, my main focus on town forest is using them for education and demonstration. So again, these are unique properties that are managed by individual communities, and that often individual local communities have more of sort of a collective stake in these properties. And so it's a really cool opportunity to engage with people and showcase some work that we're really proud of. I've also used town forests to sort of draw the line between, I think something we need to recognize in forestry in general is that we are, as we cut trees, we are doing it in a way, we can do it in a way that is very, very good for forest ecology, and that can support all of the things we really care about while we're generating local renewable resources and income for local projects. So this is an example of a project from Heinsberg from 2007 where they took ash trees that were cut from their town forest, milled them up into flooring, and refloored their town hall and made it into this project that they called From the Forest to the Floor, which was a really, really neat project. Another example is the work that I've done with the Heinsberg Town Forest over the last 2 winters, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second, where we've done a demonstration forest management project, so a lot of education, a lot of outreach, and also I think making the forest more diverse, more complex, helping it more closely resemble old growth forest, which is a type of ecological forest management that I practice. At the same time, we generated income, and that income we turned around to do other projects like invasive species treatment at Heinsberg's other town forest, the La Platte Headwaters Town Forest, and other really cool projects. So I think that also has a lot of value. So here's an example. This is pre-pandemic, this demonstration project that I did at the Heinsberg Town Forest. So what we did basically was try to show off and showcase forest management in a way that gave people a lot of different opportunities to get involved, right? So saying that this is not something we're ashamed of, this is something that we can be really proud of. And oftentimes the biggest barrier is just sort of getting people to participate. So people already know what they think about forest management, they already know what they think about logging, and sort of put that on the shelf and they don't have to ever think about it again. Well, what I tried to do is really engage with the nuance of what we're doing and showcase how it can actually be done really well. And I did that by trying to engage people in a lot of different ways, offering different opportunities, cultural events, and also walks at all different seasons, all different days, with all different kinds of partners. We worked with City Market Co-op in Burlington and Audubon, Vermont, and the Vermont Land Trust and Vermont Fish and Wildlife. We did a pride hike with Vermont Pride Center at the active logging job. And in that way, hope to sort of broaden the coalition and say, I personally think that forest management is for everybody and that most people are in favor of forest management, but they just don't know it yet. And so just trying to get them out there so we can have a conversation about it is a huge part of it. And like I said, income from that project, so we generated income from that project is being used to fund trail restoration and for the Fellowship of the Wheel, who's the local mountain bike trail group, future conservation of the Heinsberg Town Forest, and also invasive treatment at the La Platte Headwaters Town Forest, and to do stuff like put in educational signage so that the work that I did doing education and outreach can sort of persist even after we're not on the ground every week like we were during the project. And this is my last slide. One of these really tough nuts to crack, and I'm doing a forest management project right now, we're just getting started, where I'm trying to do a very similar model at the Andrews Community Forest in Richmond. And the tough thing is that we can't do those big in-person public events, and so we have to be creative. And so what I'm really focused on, sort of in how I utilize and interact with town forests during this pandemic is from the perspective of outreach. And so what I've done is a similar model, but transfer those in-person events to virtual events. So I do virtual events with all different kinds of partners about sort of all different aspects of forest management, so that even if you're not into forestry, maybe you're into wildlife, maybe you're concerned about the emerald ash borer, maybe you're interested in carbon and climate resilience in our forests, or ecology and conservation, and providing events with different partners for all those things. It's also kind of interesting doing outreach during this time, because even if we don't get great attendance at the virtual events, I still record them and I put them on my YouTube channel, in addition to other short videos that I've done, and anybody can watch them anytime they want. And so I think that's actually a real benefit of doing these virtual events. I'm using social media a little bit through these town forests. So in this case, it says follow Andrews Community Forest on Facebook. It should say using social media, using Facebook as a tool. And also I've started doing self-guided tours. So using an app called Avenza to allow people to navigate through the area that we're going to be working in when the trees have been marked, so they can see what it is, and see where they are in the harvest area. And there's a legend on there to tell them what all the different markings mean. Also exploring some other things like photo posts, where people can take a picture from the exact same place as the forest is harvested, and as it changes and develops over time, and we can see how it regenerates. Using drone photos and videos is something that I'm working on right now. And hopefully, of course, we'll return to in-person events, because I think that with this pandemic, people's connections to these lands have never been stronger. And a lot of really special stuff happens when we're out there on the land. So with that, I think I would be happy to take some questions if you have any about that massive fire hose of information. There's a whole lot more there, but I do want to be respectful of our other presenters.
Ethan, will you open it up for questions now?
Yep. Yeah, please.
I'm sorry, I meant Jens. Will you open it up so people can ask questions now?
Oh yeah, anyone can unmute themselves, I believe.
Okay.
But here's one from the group chat. Michael Quinn asked, our Windsor Town Forest receives daily high volume recreational use year round. We do not have a recreational management plan for our town forest, Paradise Park. The PP Commission seems to think that our Windsor County Forester will create a recreational management plan for us. Should we have a recreation management plan, and who is responsible for creating that plan? Thank you.
So, I haven't interacted with town forests that have a specific recreation management plan. What I have interacted with is town forests that have what we would call just a management plan. So oftentimes the town forests that I work with, they'll have a management plan, which is sort of a broad governance document that you develop with the public process and within, engagement, giving people a lot of opportunities to be involved. And then I will develop a forest management plan, which has more specific stuff like data on managing the forest, specific forest management actions that we want to take over some period of time, usually 10 years, and stuff like that. I will say that Kate Forer and the folks at the Urban and Community Forestry Program developed a tool called the Vermont Recreation Planning Toolkit, which actually outlines how you can go through a recreation planning process. And I've seen that process usually as part of a broader management plan process, but there's all kinds of stuff in there, from a survey template that you can use to stock language that you can use in a management plan, and different ways of assessing recreational usage and impacts and stuff like that. So I would refer you to that. Again, I believe it's called the Town Forest Recreation Planning Toolkit, which anybody can access. It's completely open source. And I'd be happy to send a link to somebody if they want to shoot me an email about that. Yeah, so recreation, it's a tough nut to crack, as far as how you manage recreation specifically. But usually it's how we manage recreation, especially in relation to the other uses that we care about, like wildlife habitat, ecology, and stuff like that, and other uses like forest management.
Thanks, Ethan. And there's one more here from Sabina. Could you give a little bit more info on the self-guided Avenza tours?
Yeah, hey Sabina. So some stuff from this pandemic that I do for outreach on town forests, I think is gonna is going to carry over. So I like virtual. I think that we're all like really fatigued from these Zooms, but I really like virtual events. I like that I can record them. I like how accessible they are to everybody, that everybody can just sit at home if they have a computer and participate and watch them. And the self-guided tours is another one of those. So there's an app, and you spelled it correctly, Sabina. So if you look in the group chat, you'll see how to spell Avenza. So Avenza is an app that can be free. You can have up to 3 georeferenced PDF maps on it. So a georeferenced PDF is just a PDF that's been output from a mapping software like ArcGIS. So if you have a town forest and you have a map of that, most likely it's a georeferenced PDF map. And it shows where you are on that map. And so in my case, what I did is I had, a portion of the Andrews Community Forest that we're going to be managing. And I depicted that on a PDF map. And then I also had a legend on the map that said, okay, in these areas, a blue slash means this is a tree we're going to cut. An area enclosed by orange flagging and a vertical blue stripe means that this is the boundary of a gap that we're going to create, stuff like that. But I think it's actually a pretty powerful tool that we could use in other contexts. So like at the Heinsberg Town Forest, I've done some pretty detailed mapping of the area that we've managed over the last couple of years. And my goal is that this could be sort of a tool for an educational tour. So if people want to, they can navigate to one part of the forest and see where we've created some early successional habitat, or where it's a really good example of sort of, forest structural diversity, which is something we really want to encourage, or a good example of a canopy gap. And so people can sort of take themselves on a tour and see all this other cool information that's depicted on that map. And that's something I want to do going forward, definitely.
Great, that's all we've got. Thanks, Ethan. Back to you, Mark.
Thanks, Jens.
Okay, well, our next speaker, then I'll turn it over to Nick.
Hello, everyone. I'm looking at the list of people on here. There's some very knowledgeable people in this group, so I'll try to tell you things that I'll try not to tell you things that you know already. But I appreciate your time today. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. There's no excuse, but good reasons for it. I'm operating out of 3 computers in 2 locations, so I don't have access to my network right now, so I don't have a good baseline. However, I got some follow-up at the end of this that I'll share with you. Just as a quick overview, many of you know how we operate. I think one reason I'm on this panel is that I run a unique organization. The Winooski Valley Park District is a hybrid model. It's a 501c3, but it's also an incorporated municipality. And we have 7 member towns, all in Chittenden County, who provide the bulk of funding and governance for the organization. So I have a monthly meeting with trustees from each town. I do annual reports and requests to each select board. And my job requires that I interface really closely with the member towns. And I loved Ethan's presentation. He probably sees the same thing I do. Each town presents its own culture and its own philosophy around the use of public lands. And one thing I love about my work is the challenge of working with people to get them behind certain acquisitions and decisions around the management of land. And what I really want to emphasize is the way I operate, and I'm sure a lot of you folks operate, is by sharing information. So I'm going to say this up front at the end of my brief presentation here, is that the vast majority of the documents that we have in our arsenal are all public data. So dozens of times over the last 6 years I've worked at the Park District, we've shared sample easements, management plans, and so on and so forth. So I would encourage people to contact us, because we do have files full of stuff that could help in your work. Specific to town forest, I love that history. I was aware of some of it. We obviously kind of operate, in a sense, town forests, although it's more on a regional basis. It's not under the same statute, but we essentially, our job is to acquire and to manage conservation properties. Currently, we have 19 parks. We're about to have 20 across the 7 towns. And the process is that we do work closely with member towns on their feelings around the acquisition of the property. Then we typically work with a third party, land trust to establish a conservation easement or some kind of other protective mechanism on the land. So it's very similar to what you folks do at the local level. Philosophically, we feel strongly that land should be protected in perpetuity if they're going to become under our ownership and management. And we do also have a philosophy that we own the lands that we manage. So we're not leasing land. We're not doing work on property unless we own it or unless we work under contract. Part of what we do, a very small part of our operation, but a very solid part, is we do offer fee-for-service maintenance services for some of our member towns for the properties that they own. So, specific to COVID, like all you folks, we got slammed in a very good way, we feel. Basically, after people got their arms around what was going on and the stay-at-home order hit, Jens used Colchester Pond as an example. That was kind of ground zero for usage. We had over 100 cars there the first weekend after the stay-at-home. And we were struggling with a few decisions. The initial decisions, whether we should keep parks open. If you remember when COVID first came out, we were all unclear on what the transmission form was. Once it became clearer that we could safely open, that was less of a decision. Then it was a decision around communicating with the users and making sure that people understood, especially those who had never been to these sites before. We kept running into families who said, we've never been on this trail before, even though we live a couple miles away. So we had a lot of first-time users, a lot of long-time users who were being impacted by the heavier use. A lot of people bringing dogs off leash, a lot of people trying to mountain bike on trails that were not designed for that. We found that positive messaging was a huge piece of what we needed to do. We have a sign that's still up in a lot of our parks saying, thank you for helping us keep this park open. The message being that if we all distance and we all take care of their practices, that we can effectively use these parks and share them and not place each other at risk. We found that was very positive. More broadly speaking, philosophically, what I've learned in this job is that active management is critical to these areas. And I'm telling you something you probably already know, most of you, but there's still a perception out there that you can acquire conservation lands and kind of leave them be and have that be the sort of the end of the story. And to us, that's the beginning of the story. There are parts of our park system that are heavily used that we manage for parking lots and heavier use trails and puncheons and bridges and so forth. And the other parts of our system that are intentionally managed for a lot lower use. Having an effective management plan for each park is absolutely critical. So I appreciated the questions about management plans. I'd be happy to share any plans that we have. Ours are typically formulated with a conservation easement also part of the picture. So sometimes the management plan is referred to by the conservation easement, saying it shall be managed by a plan that is updated every 5 years. Sometimes we have a plan in place and then we negotiate an easement. Those two documents really drive how we manage parks day to day. Some things that we found really successful, especially during COVID, is really establishing eyes and ears on the ground for people who live close to the parks. We've got several parks where we pay people to open and close gates, and they also call us when there's issues that come up. We found that that's been especially important under COVID as the usage has increased. And we also have a couple of parks where caretakers live on site. You may find a situation where a farm is being donated and there's a residence on site. Having a caretaker who lives there under reduced rent is something that we found as being an amazingly strong management model. And the issues that we are constantly dealing with, beyond the obvious ones around parking and trash, are mountain bike use. Where is that going to be appropriate? recreational conflicts, and of course, invasive species. And I guess the other philosophical thing that's really been reinforced as an increased use in our parks is that volunteer trail maintenance is an important piece to build community. However, having a core professional service to do the main trails maintenance is critical, because once one part of the system starts to break down, the perception that people have when they go into the park becomes more negative. You get more problems with overcrowding and trash and so forth. So it's a balance between all those things. Really the core things that we've learned during COVID is the positive messaging, treating all the park users like customers, responding really quickly to people's concerns. I've had tons of emails and phone calls about stuff that has nothing to do with parks, because people are feeling very stressed during this time. And also with us, specifically with the many towns we work with, is really learning what the ecological values are of each town, which is they each have their own DNA in terms of how they approach town forests and open lands generally, and to try to really focus on maintenance as being an important part of what we do. And I just want to reinforce my email is nickwarner@wvpv.org. And I'll be more than happy to follow up with anyone on this list. I could learn a lot from you guys. And once again, I'm looking at the list here, and it's very impressive who's on this call. And we'd be happy to share any of our documentation, our plans, sample easements, our operating budget. Any of that stuff is open source. We're a public agency, so I'd be thrilled to share that stuff with you. That's really mainly what I wanted to share. I wanted to learn today too. I've already learned a lot from the first presentation. I'm looking forward to Elaine's, and I'd be happy to field any questions at this point.
Nick, this is Jens. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how we can use human health in our messaging as further justification for conservation. Can this new interest in our lands help us get more conserved lands? And how do we do that messaging to make the connection?
I think that's definitely an intrinsic thing, that message of all this. And I think you bring up a good point, that we feel like people are getting that at a level that they didn't used to. And that it's not politically held in these kind of weirdly split political times, that across the board people are understanding. I think another piece that I use a lot is I'm really intrigued by the concept of conservation economics, where you can actually quantify the impact of open space on adjoining residences and on the overall health of a community from an economic basis. As an example, it's been shown that if you add a well-managed outdoor permanently conserved conservation area next to a residential community, that the property values in that community actually go up by anywhere from 4 to 20%, depending on a number of factors. So it's about human health, but it's also, when we do an acquisition, we always get the question, well, you're locking up that land, you're taking it off the tax rolls, you're determining a use on a permanent basis. And I find that having both the discussion about what the quality of life and how it's going to be positively changed, and also the economic benefits to adjacent landowners, often changes the whole tenor of the conversation.
Thanks, Nick. If there are other questions, feel free to unmute yourself or write them in the chat. I don't see any at this time.
I do have some really cool PowerPoints. I just didn't have access to them. I apologize for that, but I'd be happy to share those as well. I've got a number of presentations that I could share with anyone in the group. So I look forward to following up with people on this call.
Great. Elaine, let's introduce our next speaker, Elaine Wang, the Assistant Town Manager for the town of Barre, talk about the Barre Town Forest.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. Good to be here with you. I think I've just been introduced, so I don't have to go too much in more detail. I did want to commend, I know when Jens invited me and we had that conversation about the future panel on equity, I did want to commend the Association of Vermont Conservation Commissions for tackling the historic exclusion of people of color from the conservation sphere, and encourage you all to engage with that here in Vermont. So I'm going to introduce you to the Barre Town Forest and discuss changes in use during the pandemic as soon as I can share my slide here. Oops, gotta share screen first. Screen 2. No, screen 1.
We see your slide sorter, and now we see your full screen.
Okay, thank you. And can you see my pointer moving?
Yes, you can also right click and change pointer options to a highlighter, but it's good enough.
Okay. So just an overview first. This square Pac-Man, I like to think of it, is Barre Town. This is Barre City in the valley cutout. And the yellow area here down here in the southeast is the town forest. You can see the subdivisions here. They indicate the number of parcels that were involved in the conservation of the town forest lands. It's all treated as one now, of course, but it's a hint at the history of what went into it and what happened before. So this is a closer view of that same set of parcels. You can see the current Rock of Ages granite quarrying operations to the west. And then now, without all the yellow blocking your view, you can see all the little bodies of water dotting the town forest. These are all former quarry holes because the granite that's here was also in this area. And I mention all that because, as Ethan said, you know, all town forests in Vermont are special in their own way. And I'd say what's special about ours is the quarry history. This is what's locally known as the number 6 quarry hole. It's just beautiful. The town forest is on 370 acres of old quarry land that's been reclaimed by nature over the last 100 years after the less profitable quarries went out of business. The town forest parcels were conserved thanks to a lot of support from many partners. I can see here on the right. Ours does have a conservation easement held by the town Vermont Land Trust, hi Caitlin, and the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. So the value of the town forest usually, and now through this pandemic, includes all the values that Ethan introduced in the statute. Producing wood products, maintaining wildlife habitat, protecting water supplies, providing recreation and conservation education. And I'll show you some pretty pictures of what that looks like in our town forest. Recreation uses include 4-season trails used for mountain biking, including more recently by hand cycle adaptive athletes. I'll mention that this particular view is actually not in the town forest. It's in an adjacent parcel, though. It's owned by Rock of Ages, and they allow the public to access it. Also hiking, of course, volunteer-led nature walks. Like you see here, this is a nature walk going on, and horseback riding. Also in the winter, we have fat biking, cross-country skiing, and snowshoeing. And all that's enabled by, meaning the trail network, which is 20 miles in the summer and fall, and maybe half of that in the winter. That's all enabled by the maintenance by an all-volunteer Millstone Trails Association. I think that we're not unique in that Vermont's lucky to have all these outdoor enthusiasts that are willing to pitch in this way. They do trail maintenance structure work, like here they're repairing a bridge through the summer and fall, and then grooming in the winter. I think this year they came up with this interesting 3-tire method. Separate from the pedestrian and bike trail network, there's also a vast snowmobile trail through the town forest that predates the conservation of those parcels. And finally, there's a disc golf course, there's also a disc golf course developed, funded, and maintained by volunteers on the northwest quarter of the town forest. You'll recognize that blob is the town forest, so it's up here. Oops. And you can just see, again, this is the number 6 quarry hole, and you can just see a basket perched on the top of that. A lot of people love playing on this course because it's just so scenic. Finally, on the recreation front, I'll mention the town forest is also used as part of 2 festivals a year, known as Rockfire and Fallfire. It's actually organized by a landowner that still owns land next to the town forest and was one of the property owners that gave up their land as part of the easement. Other than recreation, the town forest also provides the key value for drinking water source protection. The area around our groundwater well that needs to be protected is outlined by this kind of alien looking blob. The eye is the well for the East Barre water system. And you can see how the town forest parcels here overlap with about half of the water source protection area. These areas on the right here are farmland. Luckily, they're being used as hay and being operated organically at the moment. So we're in pretty good hands. There's only a few private properties here, or rather homesteads there. And of course, there's also the value of the town forest for wildlife habitat, both charismatic megafauna and what some might consider unattractive microfauna. This is a photo of a vernal pool workshop featuring the vernal pool in the middle. This one's part of the VPON monitoring project run by the Vermont Center for Eco Studies. Speaking of education, we do have 2 informational kiosks, one in each parking area. We change out the educational posters quarterly. This summer, you can't see, I'm sure it's too small, but we feature moths, and then you see these orange signs here that were about COVID safety. One piece that wasn't mentioned in the state statute, maybe because it's completely obvious, is that there's also the value for northern forest conservation. This is a picture of some of our regular volunteers with what I like to call the town forest weed warriors. They help rid the town forest of invasive plants like buckthorn, invasive honeysuckle, Japanese barberry, and Japanese knotweed. The wonderful thing about the state of the Barre Town Forest is that a recent inventory conducted by the Vermont Land Trust showed a low instance of invasive plants. So our 5 to 10 or so weed warriors keeping up with removal means that the town's forest can serve as a native plant reserve for the area, which I find very gratifying myself. So shout out to Caitlin Cusack, who's on this call from the Vermont Land Trust, who's for making this invasive management project possible and sustainable. We haven't been able to do it without her. So this slide just sums up the values of our town forest to us. On the last bullet, I'll just mention that we will be logging the town forest for the 2nd time this winter, and the town expects to receive some revenue for that. The first time we logged it, we got about $1,600. Not huge, but certainly not going to turn that down. So, changes due to the pandemic. Anecdotally, there were many more cars in the town forest parking lots than before, on weekdays and on weekends. It wasn't to the point where I think some more populated areas of Vermont were starting to struggle. There was an uptick, but it didn't reach the point where we felt like it was necessarily a problem. Millstone Trails Association had a 26% more season pass sales this year compared to last year. Just a guess, those season pass holders are probably local. They have not tallied up their day pass revenue, which is probably not local users. So that would be interesting to see that breakdown. Of course, nobody stops you if you don't have a pass, so there's much more use of it than is reflected in those passes. And also, the passes are actually just for mountain biking. So if you're walking through there, nobody knows how many people are doing that. So fortunately, again, the town forest is big enough and most of the trail network is dry enough, especially this year, unfortunately, due to the drought, that we haven't seen much trail damage or erosion. So that's a good thing. We can provide that value with the town forest without risking its condition. So when the weather started to warm up, the town put out a bunch of PSAs on a regular basis about the relative safety of the town forest, bike paths, and open spaces for recreating as compared to the playground. So this is something that went out with our town newsletter that goes out quarterly, kind of highlighting where to go. That might be a better option, especially those playgrounds. We just, at that time, we weren't comfortable making for people to play in them. Another value of the town forest to the area is that it's a draw for tourism. This was a quandary for us early on because during the pandemic, due to the stricter travel prohibitions, we'd see out-of-state license plates in the lots as people were looking for safe places to recreate. I suspect we had an uptick in use when UVM came back into session, but we never accosted anyone because, once you're in the woods, who knows where you came from. And as Nick was saying, with the more research about the relative safety of outdoors, it turned out to be the right thing, right? It was okay probably that people were coming from elsewhere and recreating in the town forest. Another quandary was what to do with the portalet. It's funny how much brain cell time that took up for discussing that one thing. We tried to keep it closed for a while, but it would always get opened by somebody who was, desperate. Some recreation board members were concerned that there would be an increase of people relieving themselves in the woods. I felt at that time that it wasn't as big of a problem compared to people potentially getting infected while they were hanging out inside the portalet, but eventually we did decide to open it again. And we posted the signs on the doors and provided a 4x4 piece of lumber to prop the door open with to promote air circulation, which is supposed to be excellent at dispersing COVID that's suspended in the air. Sometimes people prop it open, sometimes they don't. I don't think they really register what it's there for. You just do your best, right? Another change, Disc Golf Vermont has an annual tournament in the town forest. This is usually part of a regional tour that involves hundreds of participants, but this year they agreed to make it Vermont residents only. And I think they just topped 100 participants this year. It was the first big event the town allowed after the pandemic because it had improved prior to the pandemic. So we were especially formal with the conditions. You can see the memo here that we sent to them. These conditions were informed actually by Disc Golf Vermont. They had consulted the Professional Disc Golf Association, and we added a few items from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development's guidelines after those were clear. So some of those conditions included tee times, which they've never had before. So the idea is you only arrive 15 minutes before your tee time. Online players meeting as opposed to on-site just before, and holding it over 2 days instead of one, again, just spreading people out. Another change, the public library, which usually holds story time and fairy house building in the town forest a few times in the summer for kids, changed their tactic this year to a story walk format. This involves laminating pages of a book and posting them along a trail. It's a completely temporary installation. The walk takes young children about 15 minutes, and it's really been a hit. If you follow their Facebook page, you can see the people who are just so happy that that was put up and made available and engaging for kids, and allows them to get into the woods a little bit and exercise and read, which is all good stuff. They've done 3 different books so far, and I think they're going to do one more in October, and that'll be it for the year. So that's really it for my comments about the changes in the town forest use due to the pandemic. Appreciate your attention, and I'll try to answer any questions you have.
Great, thanks so much, Elaine. There's one question. Michael was just wondering if you're associated with Berlin Pond, but no, Barre and I don't believe so, but I'll let you answer it.
Yeah, that's correct. That's a different municipality.
Yeah. If there are no other questions in the chat, if folks would like to unmute themselves, you may ask your question directly. All right.
Hi, Jens, this is Zach Porter. Do you mind if I speak up?
Yeah, please.
Thanks for the great presentations today. And just wanted to ask what seems like a timely question. I'm sure many of those on this call are aware of the fact that the Global Warming Solutions Act passed yesterday. There was a vote to override the veto. And this creates incentive, theoretically, for Vermonters to start thinking creatively about how they can use their town forests in efforts to maximize carbon storage and reduce greenhouse gas emissions as a state. And so I'm just curious if the speakers might address this. And I'll just also, mention that, our own Bill Keaton at UVM, Dr. Keaton's done some great research along these lines and has some excellent papers available. I might put one in the chat just to show folks what he's done, but just to point at the benefits of passive management approaches in terms of maximizing carbon storage. But I'm just, curious what the speakers might say about this opportunity for Vermonters to make a meaningful difference in their own backyards with their town forests towards realizing these new statewide carbon reduction targets. Thanks.
Elaine, any thoughts on that? And then we'll go over and see what Nick has to say.
Sure, I have a fairly straightforward thought, which is I would like to see that paper because I'm not familiar with what else we would do since we don't do a terrible lot of management of the forest. So if there's something that we would be actively doing to promote carbon storage, it would certainly be of interest to me to consider.
I'd like to see it too. And I appreciate that point, Zach. And I've been really intrigued about the whole carbon markets as well. The city of Burlington is actually doing some really interesting work around that. The whole concept of carbon credits, which, politically you can look at both sides of that, where offsite entities can purchase and help support conservation on our end, and then also provide them carbon credits on the other. That's only one piece of a very big solution. But philosophically, I can tell you my board is really interested in acquiring land for the purpose of exactly what you're talking about. And this is going to provide good, solid data and political support for that, which is what we really need. So I would love to see that paper and any other information that you have on that.
Great. Any other questions? I don't see any in the chat.
I do want to add almost a plug for part of what Jens does, which is utilizing the data that's being generated through Jens' work and, understanding, integrating the ecological values into the town planning process. And some towns do this better than others, but having the ecological value of lands being part of the actual town plan is something that is relatively new, and when it's done well, it means that when development occurs, that there's a much better understanding writ large of what kind of impact that's going to have and what kind of opportunities are out there. And I see a lot of really great work being done with that, and it's something that I think it's going to increase over the next decade.
Thanks so much, Nick. That's awesome. Great. Zach did put that paper in the chat, so you all can access it there. And I just want to thank our speakers again. Thank you so much for your thoughts and insights today. We very much appreciate your time, and thanks to all the participants for joining us. Our next one is going to be in 2 weeks on the Conservation Commission success stories in a time of COVID. And so it'll detail some of the ways that conservation commissions have been adapting to work, much like some of the examples that Elaine and Nick were able to offer about how we've changed our business as usual. And so we'll have examples from anywhere from how we've changed the way we do meetings to the way we're hosting asynchronous events and doing an increasing number of things in online environments as well. So please be sure to join us for that one. And then on November 11th at 7 o'clock at night is the keynote for this series. And that's with Paul Costello from the Vermont Council on Rural Development. And he's really going to bring this all together, this theme of, these last 6 months of change, and not only how the conservation community has had to react to COVID, but also how we've reacted to the Black Lives Matter movement and the issues of racial justice that are intrinsic to the conservation movement as well. And so we're really wrestling with how do we handle all of these changes, and what is the future of the conservation movement or the conservation work we do at the local level look like in the face of all this change moving forward. We suspect some of the tools that we're identifying that have worked for us in COVID will continue. Some of the citizen outreach, some of the networking tools, and some of it, we're going to be really happy to get back together and be in a room full of other people and not feel uncomfortable. So we'll see what the future looks like. But in any event, thank you all so much for joining us, and hope you'll join us for the rest of the series and that keynote talk on November 11th. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Enjoy. Thanks, everyone.